For a lot of people, the trickiest part of setting up flat work, concrete flat work, is understanding the slopes, the grade, how to make the water run in the direction it has to run. It's easy enough to visualize the straight lines. I mean, you can tell where you want to walk and you can tell where you want it to start and stop. It's even easy enough to visualize the dirt that you have to dig out in order to get the concrete in place. But it's just a little trickier to figure out how to measure and how much slope you want to make sure that the water behaves the way you want it to behave. This job is almost entirely sidewalks. I mean, there's some aprons, but none of it is very wide. Even though the sidewalks are not wide, the sidewalks are long. And you don't just have to think about the water falling across the walk. You have to make sure that your walk is not accidentally funneling water, let's say, from that garage into this shop. You have to be able to check the elevations because, believe me when I tell you, the water that falls from the sky or comes out of your garden hose is certainly going to check the elevations for you after the concrete is hard. In order to have confidence that your slope is right, it's going to take some sort of a special tool. Now, there are not a large number of tools. In fact, there's a fairly small number of tools that will do this, but you need to decide which tool you're going to be comfortable buying, borrowing, renting, or coming up with in some other method that you're going to use to establish the slopes. The first one that most people probably have is a level. And a level is fine as long as the distance that you need to develop can be reached with your level. A level can be short or a level can be long. A short level can be put on a straight board in order to check, height difference between a garage floor and a concrete form. But in many cases, it has to be over a much greater distance than that. And it brings us to the three tools that I want to talk about that can be used to establish slope over long distance. Just like every other tool, these three tools, a builder's level, a laser, and a water level, each have their strong and weak suits. If I was going to sort of generalize, I would say that the water level is the least expensive and slowest. The builder's level is probably the most expensive and most accurate, and not as slow as a water level, but not as fast as a laser. A laser is very fast, very man-hour efficient, but not as accurate as a builder's level. Now, if you have a builder's level, you have to pay close attention to setting it up. It's not going to shoot a grade any more accurate than the accuracy that you use in establishing the plane, the perfectly level horizontal plane that the instrument is shooting in. That is, when the vials are equidistant, centered in the calibrated vial, no matter where you turn it around its circumference, then you know the line is going to be level all the way around its circumference. A water level, this one, by the way, is pretty space age. They can be just as simple as a piece of surgical tubing 100 feet long. And if you're careful, you can get the water, since water will always find and seek its own level, to identify 2 points at the same elevation, however far apart your hose is. This one is equipped with buzzers and whistles and bells, and we'll demonstrate that in another video. But it is the same principle. Water will seek its own level. A laser has become iconic of construction sites because of that sound. And even though it is, 20th century, 21st century technology, and builders' levels are much, much older than that, an interesting thing is that most lasers are not as accurate as a mid-grade builder's level. The reason for that is your sensor, my sensor on this TopCon, has two settings. The most accurate setting is that it begins to sing or beep a 1/16 of an inch above the mark, and it will beep to within a 1/16 of an inch below the mark. The coarse setting is 1/8 of an inch in each direction, which means I could be off by as much as 1/4 of an inch. This thing, on the other hand, will shoot almost exactly on a mark, but it takes two men. One looking through the instrument, one holding the rod. So a builder's level and a laser are functioning in a similar way, and that is they are projecting a plane, a reasonably level, perhaps perfectly level, more or less, plane to the limit of their effective range. A builder's level, quite a ways. A laser, quite a ways, several hundred feet sometimes. But the level, the plane, is recognized with a laser audibly. The plane is recognized with the builder's level visually, but the effect is the same. You determine an elevation at a particular point, and then you can travel and see if the elevation at this point is different. In this case, the elevation, I'm going to do this a quick and dirty way, is about 2 3/4 inches lower than it is over there. You see that? The plane that is projected is made permanent at the bottom of that rod, but the form is below the bottom of the rod. That introduces the very counterintuitive idea that to get a reading that is lower, you raise your eye up. And to get a reading that is higher, you slide your eye down. Now, a builder's level is the same concept, a theoretical horizontal plane projected across the job site. But to identify and get significance from the plane, you have to mark and understand the instrument height, which is where the builder's level is looking. In this case, earlier, there's a mark right there that it was the point where the builder's level was oriented. You then can take a tape measure, measure from the theoretical distance or the actual distance where the top of the concrete is going to be. In this case, 58.5 inches. And then by marking on any sort of a rod, in this case, Nate used a piece of electrical conduit, 58.5 inches, you know that when the same instrument sees through the crosshairs the same mark, the bottom of the rod is at the same height as it was back at your benchmark. I hope that makes some sense. The laser will do that for you audibly with one person. The builder's level will do it for you more accurately using 2 people. And that is why builder's levels are often used to set, for instance, anchor bolts and weld plates for locating machinery, in transformer stations where things have to be exactly right to elevation. You'll see builder's levels or possibly transits being used, whereas in a more production setting or on a standard foundation on any sort of a standard building, or for grading, rough grade and excavation, it will always be a laser. So there are some practical considerations about how to transfer the information from elevation into your forms. But the first thing that you always have to remember is the slope has to be adequate to carry the water it has to carry. In general, 2% or 1/4 of an inch per foot is great. You can live with a little less. You can live with 1/8 of an inch per foot if you have to, which is about 1%. But don't go any less than that, or you're going to have little ponds, little low spots, which are called bird baths, and nobody wants those in a sidewalk or in a driveway. Now, in terms of the real-world method for establishing the slopes and then transferring that to your forms, it involves line stakes and string lines. You have to put your elevation marks on a line stake and then stretch a string from mark to mark. A tight string is virtually straight and can be used as the reference you need to get your forms to the right elevation. So whether it's a straight slope or a cross slope or a compound slope, the water's going to go away. On this little job, what I just described is illustrated beautifully with a cross slope that comes away from the house and then sideways down the pitch from the higher side of the sidewalk down to sort of an invert right here. An invert is a low point in a flow line. So slopes can be tricky, but not too tricky, because thankfully water always runs downhill. If you would like to watch the whole process of getting these sidewalks prepped and poured, check out this video. It's fun to watch, and you might learn a thing or two along the way. Thank you for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.